Hello and welcome back to another episode of De-Stress with me, Dr. Amanda. On this podcast, I like to highlight the often underestimated effects that stress can have on our lives, our bodies and our health. Today, my guest is Rachel Francis. She's a mother, a wife, a pharmacist. She is an entrepreneur with her own travel business and property portfolio, and she also creates content online on her Instagram and TikTok pages. We had a conversation today about her journey and how she navigated through the stress of becoming a mother. She has 3 beautiful children in the space of 3 years, but it wasn't a straightforward journey, and I hope you really benefit from this conversation. It was so interesting. She was very vulnerable and shared so much of her journey, and also the role that stress played in her becoming pregnant. I also wanted to highlight that this episode is a good follow-on to last week's episode where I sat down with Hannah Pern, a fertility expert, about the actual link between fertility and stress. So if you've not checked that out after this episode, go and have a listen to that one too. Thanks. So hi Rachel, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining me and listeners. Before we start, I'd just love you to introduce yourself, let everyone know who you are, and then we can get into the conversation.
Sure. Hi, Dr. Amanda. Thank you very much for having me on as well. Really excited to have this conversation with you about fertility, about my fertility journey. So my name is Rachel. I am a mum to 3 beautiful miracles. They're all under 5, 2.5 years from the beginning to the end of them. So I've had 3 pregnancies in 3 years. Before that, we had fertility issues. So I'm on here, I guess, to talk about that with you today. I am also a pharmacist. So I work in general practice now. I've been a pharmacist for almost 20 years, actually. But I've been in general practice for the last 7 years. I also work for the ambulance service as well as an urgent care pharmacist. I love to sing. I'm a Christian. I've been a Christian since I was about 13. I've traveled the world as a professional gospel singer. I have sung with so many different artists in the gospel arena and also in the secular arena. So I've done stuff with Madonna. I've done stuff in the O2 arena. I've been to Barbados, I've been to Spain, I've been to Portugal, I've been to France, I haven't been to Japan, but yeah, I've been to a lot of places basically doing all of that. I'm not sure what else there is to say about myself. I guess I'm a bit of an all-rounder. I do have a health page that I talk to pharmacists that are new to the sector that I'm working in, literally just basic kind of information for those that are new to the sector. And I also do talk a lot about my fertility journey. I've also got a travel business that I have just started up as well. So that's quite exciting. Yeah, I think I'll stop there actually.
Brilliant. And this is the thing. This is honestly, guys, if you hear that, how much life and everything you've experienced. Basically, I connected with Rachel online on Instagram. I found you on there when I started my health page, and then I remember you reached out to me once to do a bit of a collaboration on your stories. And since then, we've been talking a lot more. Even with the travel business as well. My husband's getting involved in that. And I just found every time I watched your stories or we would message each other, I just found we're so similar and so many things that we're connecting on, whether it's that you're a clinician or you're always very busy like I am, and the ages of your children are very similar. I believe our daughters are my eldest and your daughter are born the exact same month. Or maybe is she November?
She's December.
Okay, yeah, so they're born the same month. And so there were just so many similarities there. And so every time I see you post, I'm like, there's just so much there. And I'd love to do more with you and collaborate more with you. And it's just amazing, the world of social media, how you can connect with people that you may never have met beforehand.
I know,
and
crazy.
I've only just recently learned about you and your gospel singing and how much you've done with that. But when I started this podcast, I knew that I wanted to get you onto the podcast, but I didn't know what topic to talk about because there were so many things, whether it was juggling juggling things, starting your own business, whether it was being a clinician, working in the NHS, being a working mom, but prioritizing family and sorting out schedules, all those things were going through my mind. But then I was like, actually, your fertility journey would be really interesting to talk about because it can be a point of stress for so many different reasons. We know there's often this phrase that goes around, you know, when people are struggling with their fertility, that you just need to relax. You know, when you stop stressing or when you stop trying, that's when you have a baby. But it's often a lot more complicated than that. And the whole thing of trying to conceive in itself can cause stress, and the effects that stress can have on your body and your sleep and your hormones can then affect your fertility. And
Absolutely.
so it's just amazing that you know, right now you're in the place where you have 3 beautiful children. Beautiful children. You did it in such a short space of time. And I've seen snippets of your story online, but I'd love for you just to tell us more about what happened, and really how if stress played a part in that, and how you kind of got to the point now where you have this beautiful family, and what the journey was like to get there. So I'll let you start at the beginning, or wherever you feel is the right place to start, but tell us about your journeys to your family.
Sure, no problem. I think what I wanted to start off with saying as well is fertility sometimes is that not that much of an issue for everybody. So some people are experiencing infertility, but it depends also in terms of the circumstances of who is around them, what culture they are in, and what community they belong to. And I think what I wanted to say is, within the Black community, fertility is very sensitive, because it is very much it's even mixed with sometimes faith a little bit as well, and it's just really, it can make you feel very invalidated, I think, as a woman within our community. And so I just wanted to kind of stress that as well, because I do remember even IVF, when I was having IVF conversations online, and there were women from other communities that were openly talking about IVF. I kind of just said, you know, some of us aren't comfortable talking about IVF journeys within, and they couldn't understand why that would be an issue. And I think, again, it's just around the community that we belong to. So, so I was married for about 5 years before I realized that actually I think we might have a fertility issue. So I got married at 30, which is late within our community as well, potentially.
The Black Christian community is its own kind of nuanced thing. And there's just so much history that goes into like the Black community, first of all. Then you add the Christian aspect to it as well. And the expectations of things, it's can be really complicated and convoluted. And then being a woman in that as well.
It's a lot. But I think that's probably for a podcast for another day, potentially. It's a huge topic. So I got married at 30. We didn't think we wanted to have children immediately anyway. So we kind of thought, you know, let's just give it 2 years, as most people do. And I would say that, again, most people assume they're fertile until they're not. The fact that we had the boldness to even think we had the choice as to when we're going to have children, I find amusing given my journey, because obviously at that time I didn't know there was going to be a fertility issue. We did start using contraceptives, but then I just found that it was making my skin really patchy. I was getting spotting. I just thought, I don't want to do this. I just didn't want to do it anymore. And then we just found that we just weren't getting pregnant anyway. But because we weren't planning to get pregnant, it was an issue. I wasn't tracking it. And then when it got to kind of like 5 years in, I just thought, even though we're not really actively trying to get pregnant still, because we were still very busy. As I mentioned before, I was traveling the world at that time. I was still working as a pharmacist. So I was doing part-time as a pharmacist, part-time as a professional singer. And it was just amazing. I literally was just doing my shit. I was literally get off of a tour bus at like 3 a.m., go home, have a shower, start at 7 a.m. in the pharmacy, do an 11-hour shift, go home, sleep, have the next day. Like, it was, and I had no responsibilities. Yes, I was married, but I had no children. I didn't have any, you know, my time was essentially my own. I could do what I want. I wouldn't be able to do that now with children. But that's another discussion for another time. So I just thought to myself, let's just go into the doctors and let's just see kind of what's going on. Again, there's a lot of stigma around fertility issues. It took me a long time to convince my husband to actually go for tests. He was just like, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not going for tests. We don't. No, there's nothing. When God's time. And I think, again, it's around that faith sometimes impairing our judgment. I think there's nothing wrong with going to see your doctor, having a chat about it on time, because I do speak to a lot of women that are going through fertility and they're already in their 40s or mid 40s. And actually, if you look at the NHS criteria for IVF treatments, sometimes 40 is the cutoff in terms of, so you've now missed the boat because you didn't find out on time, you know. Anyway, so yeah, we went to see the doctor. The GP fertility tests are very basic. And actually it was unexplained. They didn't know why we weren't conceiving. But because we had been married for 5 years, trying technically for 5 years, because we weren't using contraceptives, but it wasn't something that was affecting or impairing our lives because we weren't actively tracking it. So anyway, we were referred because of where we lived. We were allowed to have like 3 NHS cycles. Again, that's postcode prescribing, but that's another podcast for another day, because it depends where you live in the country as to how many IVF cycles you can have under the NHS. So we were lucky that we were able to have 3. Now, when we were referred to the fertility clinic, that's when the real juicy blood tests were available. And something called ovarian reserve was done for me, which the GP don't have access to. And that showed that my ovarian reserve was really, really low.
And think so you're 35 at this point, are you?
Yeah, at that time I was 35. Yeah, at that time I was 35. So did the test. They said that it was really low. I think it was something like 0.3. I can't really remember completely, but it was something like 0.3, and that was just really, really low. So at that point, the specialist said to me, look, your blood tests have come back. Your ovarian reserve is really low. And for listeners that don't kind of know what that is, I mean, you'd probably be able to explain it more than me, Amanda, but it's, my understanding is that it's around the quality and potentially quantity of eggs for a woman. So if your quality and quantity is quite low, it then reduces your fertility. So they just said, look, because your reserve is so low, we are only going to offer you 1 cycle as a clinic. So even though the NHS were prepared to fund 3, the clinic itself that I chose, they said that they were only going to do 1 cycle, because we have to realize that the clinics do think about their success rates, and I think they don't think about the patient. If I'm going to be honest, that's how I felt as a patient at that time. So we were offered 1 cycle. IVF, for anybody that has done IVF will know what I mean when I say it can be horrific. For me, I struggled. I think for me anyway, I'm generally quite hormone driven in the sense of when my periods are coming, I kind of know, I get really tearful, like 2 days before I'm crying about silly things. Then my period comes and I'm like, oh yeah,
that's what it was.
That wasn't real then, you know. For me, but not every woman experiences it in the way that I do, but I do think I can be quite emotional. It created a warped version of me, to be honest. That IVF it warped my reality. I think I must have been very difficult to deal with when I look back, because I was very unhappy, because I think of the hormones that I was using, and it just made life very difficult. I was interpreting things. I was very sensitive. It was just awful. I remember that first day that I had to inject myself I sat on my bed for 45 minutes, tears streaming down my face, because I'm not someone that likes blood tests and injections. I'm not gonna lie. I can give flu jabs, but I don't really want them. Like it. No. And I think just the anticipation of the pain, and also like that needle itself represented so much for me. It was very much like I remember sitting in my bed thinking, how did I get here? Like, what is this? You know,
well, can we backtrack then a little bit?
Sure.
So, when you were so in this run up, you've gone to the GP, you've had some basic bloods done, you've been referred to the IVF clinic, and then you're going through the first initial consultations. How were you at that time finding things? Because had your desire to have children really peaked at that time? Because you said before that you were like really busy, you know, you weren't actively trying. Did you have a switch where like the desire to have children increased, or how were you dealing with those conversations?
It's really interesting that you say that, because I had done a little bit of reading as well around sort of IVF, and I remember thinking to myself, you have to want it. Like, you can't just go through it and then just not want it. So I think at that point, the moment that I decided to accept a cycle, I then allowed myself to be incredibly vulnerable and admitted to myself, that actually I do want this.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, I think I was so busy and so distracted living my best life that I hadn't really unpacked my thoughts around motherhood that much. I just knew that I didn't want to regret it at the age of 50 that I hadn't done anything. So I just said to my husband that if things work out, it's great. If they don't work out, at least I know that at the age of 35, I did everything I could within my power to give myself the opportunity to be a mother. Yes. And I wouldn't live with regret. I think that's one of the most destructive emotions, because you can't do anything about things.
Exactly. It's the time has passed. And the reason I asked that question is because when you said you were sitting there with the needle meant so much, I was like, what did it mean then? Like, and is that where you become more vulnerable to yourself? You knew that it wasn't just was it not just that you were trying to prevent yourself from regretting it, is because you now wanted it?
I allowed myself to actually want it. And funnily enough, I used to have and I promise you I'm not crazy, because I knew I was doing it. I used to have I don't know if I call it premonitions or something, where I would sit in my room and I would almost imagine myself telling off a child that is standing by the door. It was so weird. And I do that now with my children. I would just be like, but what did you just say to Jessica? You just said Jessica hit you, but what did you just say to her? Was that very nice? Was that kind? Do you know what I mean? And I remember having these kinds of conversations in my head while I was going through IVF. It was really bizarre.
Like reverse deja vu, as if you were seeing, and so you could see yourself as a mother then.
I began to see myself as a mother, and it was just I did. And I think there was a level of anger I think I had for God at that time, because I thought to myself, I started to question, had I actually married the right person? Because in terms of fertility and all that kind of stuff, it's very much, even though the fertility issue at the specialist clinic lied with me, I kind of wondered whether, why is my ovarian reserve low? Why is the GP telling me that there's actually nothing wrong with me, but yet I'm coming to a specialist and they're now saying that I am? Because in those at those times, I hadn't moved over to general practice. I hadn't had that clinical kind of understanding. I was very much sort of community based at the time, and so I didn't really. I was just had a lot of questions. I just thought, God, when I walked down the aisle, down the aisle 5 years ago, you knew that 5 years later I'm going to be sitting on this bed with a needle. What are you playing at? I remember thinking things like that. I also remember thinking to myself, I don't want to be the reason that I now rob my husband of being a parent. There was just so many things that were going. And what have I done to have caused this? Is there anything in my past that I need to repent for? Is there anything generational that is now has kind of skipped generations and has landed on my head? And again, this is culture and faith being mixed together that create stories in our heads that are very real to us. I just remember doing that injection and just I eventually did it, but it took me 45 minutes to inject myself.
Well, there's just so much weight to it, what you're describing there, the questions that you're asking yourself, and the responsibility. And I think I can imagine it's really difficult as well, because to create a child, it takes two of you, right? And so whether the issue is with one person or the both of you or whatever it is, I guess it's not just an issue with one person, it's the two of you together. And so although it can be a female factor or a male factor, it should just be seen that we are having this child, so we have a low ovarian reserve, or we have a poor sperm count. This is our issue. But sometimes I can imagine that when it's been told that it's the ovarian reserve, or it's the issue has been found with your side of things, the guilt or the responsibility that you take on, saying that, am I the one robbing my husband of having children? But really, it's this journey that you're going on together. He wants to have children with you. He married you. So your problem is his problem. It's together. But I can just imagine how much weight was on you at that moment.
Definitely. And I think for my husband, he was very much kind of going through life. He wasn't, there was never a situation where he made me feel that there was any problem with me, or that he had there was none of that. And actually, if there were any things that were kind of coming from his side, he would shield me from it. I knew nothing about conversations that maybe people were having with him, which I feel like really, really helped me. I mean, there would be times I'd be in church and people would kind of, you know, when a preacher comes to, you know, a guest preacher comes and says, if there's anybody wanting children or anybody waiting for the fruit of the womb, come to the front, I'm going to pray with you. Sometimes I'd have people poking my back, go on, you know. And as because I was also in the music department, in the music ministry, sometimes we would actually physically be on stage at the time. Maybe we were already on stage backing, you know, this preacher, whatever. I would get eyes on me. I remember there was one time I was kind of standing near the side of the stage, and one sister tapped me and said, don't worry, sister, it's gonna be all right. I prophesy triplets in the name of Jesus. And I thought to myself, girl, you have no idea what I'm going through, and I don't need to publicly, I'm just not here for that anyway. But you know, people mean well. They do mean well. But
there's meaning well, but it's also the boundaries, and I think that it needs to be there. And what is better to see now, there's a lot of people still in the church that don't, you know, uphold any boundaries, but there is more of that conversation going out there now that it's not everyone's business, and your commentary is not necessary. It's like, it's just not necessary. It's not helpful.
Especially if I've not had that conversation with you. Why you even, if I don't have children, why are you assuming that my life is not complete because I don't have children? That's an assumption, you know. But so anyway, so rejected myself, and I'm going to fast forward it a little bit, and then obviously please ask me any questions if I've missed anything out. I had some scans that I needed to do to kind of just see whether the medication was working, and you have to see how many follicles have grown and things like that. And they will only sort of start to remove them if they think that they're a big enough size or there's enough of them. So bearing in mind my ovarian reserve is low, so already in my head I'm just thinking, well, you know what, God, you've clearly put me on this journey, so I'm going to assume that it has a good ending, because I don't know why you would put me on this journey and allow me to actually want something, because I was all right before. I was all right. Now I'm not okay. So I'm going to assume there's some kind of reason for this journey. So they did manage to, I'm trying to remember now. They did manage to, I think they did actually take some out. They must have done, because some of it is actually blurry because it was so stressful at that time. I actually think I've got selective memory for some of the stuff, to be honest, because some of it, I don't actually remember it clearly now. One of them was fertilized. So they had fertilized one, and that was it was only one that they were able to fertilize, and it had started to grow. But when they got to day 3, it had stopped growing, and that was the only one that they had fertilized. So
from your only cycle that you're allowed.
From the only cycle that I was allowed, and it was just one. And I remember thinking to myself, it's okay. It only takes one. It only takes one egg. It only takes one. It's fine. I don't need a million. And obviously, when you're looking at IVF, some people are completely hyperstimulated, and they produce so many. They can even freeze some. So I remember being in clinic that day. So I was doing polypharmacy review for sort of the elderly. So polypharmacy basically is patients that are on loads and loads of medication, and as a pharmacist what we tend to do is just look at the safety of the medication and just ensure that they're on the right drugs and not on any unnecessary ones that are going to cause harm, just for listeners that aren't familiar with that. So I was doing a polypharmacy clinic in the afternoon, and it was all elderly patients, and I say this for a reason. So during patients, I just thought, let me just turn on my phone. I generally turn my phone off when I'm in clinic. So in between patients, I was waiting for a patient to arrive. So I thought, let me just turn on my phone. And I received this email from the clinic, and it said something like, we're really sorry that I can't remember the phrase that they used. We're really sorry, but it stopped growing, basically.
As an email.
I didn't know, though, that they had tried to call me, but my phone was off. They had managed to get hold of my husband. They assumed that my husband would have spoken to me, and they sent us both an email. My husband obviously couldn't reach me because I was in clinic. So I saw the email, and like it was very final. It's very like, we will not be offering you any more cycles, but we will be in touch to book a follow-up appointment with a consultant to discuss your options. Bearing in mind, I'm in the middle of a clinic. I can't just go home. But I was just, I don't know. I don't think it had sunk in, but I just knew that I had to keep going. So I called the next patient in. This patient was going on and on and on about their numerous grandchildren in that appointment. And obviously elderly patients do that. That is normal, but it just wasn't great for me. And I remember trying to kind of fight back tears and, looking away, looking at the kind of the screen and just trying to kind of gather myself before I looked back. And it was hard. It was a hard clinic. Anyway, so 2 weeks later, we had an appointment with the consultant. And that's when we sat down. And I think in my mind, I thought to myself, maybe they are going to offer me another cycle. Maybe they're going to feel sorry for me and offer me another cycle. So I remember sitting down, and it was a lady consultant. And she kind of just said, look, we're really, really sorry that it hasn't worked out for you. We can't offer you another cycle based on your blood test results. We're really sorry. The options are adoption. But what we would recommend is that if you do want to conceive naturally, you won't be able to, and you will need to get an egg donor. So yeah, in that moment, I just broke down. I couldn't hold it anymore because it had already been building up over, I was waiting for this appointment, hoping that they were going to say, actually, it's fine. I remember just breaking down, and I tried to fight the tears back. I don't think I realized how upset I was, because I tried to, tried to hold the tears back, but I couldn't. And the consultant kind of gave me a tissue and said, oh, gosh, I know it's really hard. And you can imagine how it must feel for me, because, I've had to break this news to quite a few people today. And I just thought, okay, wow, that doesn't make me feel better. But
no, and that's so interesting as a clinician. Why?
I know,
like, you shouldn't, you don't putting yourself into this, wow, 101 of breaking bad news, not to do like that.
Do you know what? It's so funny, because at that time I had already crossed over to general practice, and I was helping the registrars with their AKT. So I was doing role play. I was being the patient.
Oh yeah.
And I remember my clinical mentor, he also looked after the registrars. So on a Monday afternoon, they used to have like these kind of study sessions, and I would always join their study sessions. And I learned a lot, to be honest, from the registrars, being the patient. And I remember we had done breaking bad news as a session.
Oh yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, this doctor needs to go on a training session for breaking bad news, because it just wasn't the one. But anyway, I mean, it is what it is. Obviously, we're all learning. It wasn't intentional. It didn't make, and what do you say in situations like that? But I think in a role like that, when you are having to give that level of bad news, then you probably do need to work out what you're going to say.
And that often as well.
Yeah. So I just remember thinking, gosh, at that time I was very overscheduled. And when I realized that actually it was the end of the road for me for IVF, I thought to myself, you know what? I said, Lord, at that time I was 35. And I said, Lord, if this is for me, I need to be pregnant by 36. Like 36, my 36th birthday, I need to be pregnant. Because if I'm not, that's fine. I'm going to draw a line under it, and I'm going to then just find other things that I'm going to be doing with my life.
Yeah.
Am I going to go back to uni? Am I going to, what do I need to find another purpose? And this was before December. So my birthday is July. So this was before the December of the year before. So I was looking at what I could do within myself. I was very overscheduled. I'm suspecting there was a level of adrenal fatigue. I did read about it, but I remember reading that it's not actually a recognized medical phenomenon, to be honest. But I looked at a lot of the symptoms, and I think I was getting a lot of those symptoms, and fertility and ovarian reserve definitely came under that, as in a consequence of that. And the only driving factor I could think was just stress for me. So at that time I was working, I was touring, I wasn't sleeping properly, I was doing shift work, I was back in worship, I was in a music band as well at my church at that time, in addition. And it was very difficult because I didn't tell anybody. Nobody knew what I was going through, because myself and my husband had decided that it was going to be just us. he didn't want me to talk about it. And I think that's fine. We have to respect. Would I suggest that for those going through IVF now, knowing what I know? I wouldn't. I do think you need to find your people, find your village so that you can be supported.
Yeah.
I didn't tell anybody. People were getting a horrendous version of me, not knowing what I was. They just thought, gosh, this woman's a cow.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on?
And that's awful. The thing, isn't it? There's a lot of the time we have these like really, really difficult times in our life and we're told to keep it to ourselves or keep it quiet. And it's like, where do you get the support from then? And how do you explain anything? It's like when you're pregnant, the first trimester for some people can be so difficult for me. And that's the time you're supposed to not tell anybody. And you're hiding to throw up and you're fatigued. Like, and it's like, why am I torturing myself even more by keeping this secret too?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So I had no one to tell. So the only thing I could do, because I just thought to myself, I need to exit this. I need to relieve myself of some of this stuff. I can't keep going. The fact that I didn't withdraw from a lot of these activities while I was doing the cycle, again, made me just think, why did I do that to myself? I was stressed, which is probably what caused the ovarian reserve, low ovarian reserve in the first place. And I'm still doing those things despite doing an IVF cycle. So I literally just had to think, right, let me just go straight to my senior pastor at church. And I've been going to that church since I was about 13. So I had a good relationship with them anyway. So I just went directly to them. I went to her in the middle of it, just after service. And I just said, please, can I speak to you? And normally you do have to kind of schedule time. You can't just go up to pastor and say, come out. It's very, very busy pastors. But she saw my face and I was fighting tears. And she was like, okay, all right, come. She took the cue. I sat there, I broke down in her office and I just said, look, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. I think I need leave, please. I need leave from what I'm doing within the ministry. It's too much for me. And I told her what they'd said, that I've got low ovarian reserve, don't have enough eggs or the quality, whatever it is. And she just said, you need to rest in God, is what she said to me. Number one, rest in God. And number two, when you have a report that is so specific like that, you know exactly what to pray for. And she said to me, for you, that's a good point. You need to be praying for multiplication. If they're saying something is low, you pray for multiplication and you rest in God. And I actually took that. I took it. I remember really hitting rock bottom. This was just before I had gone to see her. I'd had like a meeting with the band at the time. And it was a horrendous meeting, but I don't blame anybody because they didn't know why they were getting a version of me. And I remember that weekend after that meeting, my husband had gone to church and he was saying bye. I was fighting back tears in my bed, but he didn't know. I managed to disguise my voice. And I remember in my head thinking to myself, I don't want to be here. I remember thinking, I don't want to be here. But then again, I was also laughing at myself, thinking to myself, because at that time I'd already started doing my general practice training as well. So part of that also is kind of knowing how to respond to patients that may feel slightly suicidal within your clinic, because I was part of the duty team. So sometimes you would get appointments that look like their medication, but they're not. When they arrive, it's a whole host of other things. And I remember the first question that you would ask a patient that kind of presents themselves as feeling quite suicidal is, have you made any plans? That is a question that you would ask, just to ascertain how acute this is. And I remember thinking in my head, I'm laughing at myself, thinking, you're not serious. You're saying you don't want to be here. You're not serious. You haven't made no plan. This is nonsense. What kind of cry for help is? I was literally laughing at myself, but I was thinking to myself, gosh, I think if I had this medication, I'm pretty sure this number, I'm not going to say what the medicine is on here, it's not necessary. But I remember thinking, if I had this medication, I'm pretty sure, I was laughing at myself, but I knew that, what, I've hit rock bottom to even be thinking about this kind of thing. And that is kind of what spurred me to go and speak to senior pastor and say, look, I just I can't function. This was around December. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that what you were saying there, it just sounds like you were completely at capacity, time-wise, emotionally-wise, mental load, at capacity completely. And what you said there about you were having those thoughts, I remember, because if the listeners go back to the episode 1, I talk about my own personal stress story. So I remember when I got to that point where I knew that I really was, what you said, hit rock bottom, just at the lowest of being, is that I was having these thoughts of, just wanting to end it, just like, I don't want to be here anymore. And it's because I needed rest. What your pastor was saying, resting God, it's because I needed rest. And to me, at that point, some of the solutions that I was thinking of how I get rest is just to not be here, and then I don't have to do all the things. And it's a scary place to be, especially when you are like, we are clinicians, you trained in this and you talk to patients about it. You're like, how am I having I'm not having these thoughts. Like, what is going on? And I'm glad that you recognize that, even though you knew like you weren't making plans, it wasn't serious like that. But the fact that your mind went there and then you reached out for help. Yeah, it's good that you did that. And I just resonated so much with what you were saying there.
Yeah, I didn't have any real protective factors at that time. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say I didn't have any. I did. Of course, I was married and I had family and stuff. But I mean, this was before I had children as well. So it was just very, I don't know. It just wasn't a nice place to be. So I literally stripped the schedule. So I broke down in her office. She then gave me that leave that I needed. From sort of active ministry. I was still going to church, I was still doing the very basics, but I wasn't doing all the extra stuff. In terms of my my day-to-day diet and stuff, I made sure that I had breakfast every morning, like things like oats that I put apple in it, and things that were kind of like and I had like complex carbs, and just made sure that I was eating properly, and I protected my sleep. I had my 8 hours sleep. No, and I just didn't do any evening rehearsals. That was just really important for me. So I remember, fast forward now, so this is for 3 months I did that. And I also took some supplements. So I took DHEA. I don't know if the people have heard of DHEA. I had to look that up. I realized that they use that a lot in American fertility clinics, but it's not in the NICE guidelines here. So there wasn't much guidance for the dosage and kind of monitoring, and so I looked it up, I researched it. I think it helps that I'm a pharmacist anyway, so I kind of knew what was kind of bogus and what isn't, and I in terms of resources. And I spoke to some of my friends, my close friends that were GPs at the time, because I was working in general practice. So some of the registrars in general practice, we were kind of like similar age, and kicking it at lunchtime, and it was fun. So I would talk to them a little bit about it. So I was doing that anyway. So in March, I think it was beginning or mid-March.
And your 36th birthday was in the July that was coming.
So mid-March, my period was late. And I remember thinking, should I do a pregnancy test? Should I not do a pregnancy test? I just thought, and I was due to actually lead worship. So I was doing like evening service worship session. And I just thought, I don't really want to do that and tarnish my mood before I'm about to go on stage and lead people in worship and praise God. Bearing in mind, I'm still, a little bit, I missed out something. I missed out something. So after that suicidal thing, and I spoke to the pastor, what happened was there was a conference that was called The River at my church. And I remember there was a song that was just going round in the atmosphere, and it was called Healing Rain. If I recall correctly, it was something like, healing rain is falling down, healing rain is falling down. I'm not ashamed. And it was going round and round and round, to the point where the atmosphere was electric, in the sense it was that kind of, like, the pastor wanted to preach, but they were just standing there. And it was that kind of atmosphere where if you touch it, whatever ailment you've got is probably not going to go home with you. It was that kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It was just one of those things. I remember going to the altar at that time. And the reason that I talk a lot about this part of my journey is I appreciate some of the listeners are probably may not have certain, they may not be part of the faith or whatever, but this is my journey. This is my story.
Exactly.
And I think it's just around, I had to rely heavily on my faith, because everything I could touch and see, scientific evidence was saying, we can't help you, go away, basically. And they're not sending me anywhere. They're just like, sorry, bye. I remember going to the altar feeling completely broken and shattered. There's a song by Kirk Franklin that talks about, God taking your broken pieces and kind of mending them. And I remember going to the altar and then just saying, Lord, again in tears, saying, Lord, I'm tired. I'm actually tired now. So all these broken pieces, I'm leaving at the altar. I need you to fix them. And I'm leaving this altar now whole because I'm tired. I can't do anything else. I can't help myself. I'm just leaving this place whole. And I meant it with my chest. I really meant it because I was tired. And I don't know if it was that evening, but it was around that time that I then had another session with God in my head. And I remember saying, if this is the plan that you have for me, so you have allowed me to want this, you have allowed this cycle not to work, which means you had no intention that this cycle was going to work, unbeknown to me. That's okay. But I need the grace to be okay with it. Because right now I'm not okay. I need the grace to be okay. And then over like a few days, I started to feel better. I started to shift my mind. I started to think, right, what do I want to do? I did consider doing graduate entry medicine, I think at that time as well, thinking actually, you know, I'm in general practice now. I'm being thrown in the deep end as a pharmacist and you're asking me to do like minor illness and all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, is this indigestion or is this an MI? Like, oh, can you just, I'm not sure about this. And I just remember thinking maybe I should just go do graduate entry medicine, or, you know, I just needed to know that this chapter is finished, so I can now move on. It can't consume me. Sorry. So yeah, I stripped my schedule, and it was still, all this is alongside me saying by the age of 36, I need there to be some kind of, if I hit 36 and there's no pregnancy, that means that's a sign from you that actually there's other things and there's greater things for me to actually be doing that motherhood is not really slotting in. So March now, I was due to lead worship, as I said. I took a pregnancy test. I had those £1, like, you know, those ones, I think it's like a Superdrug one. Yeah, you just dip it in, you hold it. Once you get in like general practice, you know. And I just thought, okay, it was positive. Because I wasn't sure if I was going to do the test or not, because I was due to go to church. I thought, but something just said to me, just do it. Like, it's not new. If it's not pregnant, it's fine. But that means then that deep down the desire was still there. So I did the test and it was saying pregnant. I just thought, oh, this must be faulty. Even though I knew as a clinician, it is not likely to be wrong if it's positive.
A false positive
there or it isn't.
A false positive doesn't really happen.
It does, but in my head I was thinking no, because but the consultant told me that I need an egg donor, so this can't be right. Like, it doesn't, they know what they're talking about. They've looked at the test. They're talking about the truth. It's facts that they're saying. No one's been unkind. So I was confused, and I thought, you know what, this thing is faulty. It's that £1. Let me go and get Clear Blue and pay like a good £10 and just, you know, let me fall prey to marketing and just go buy this product. I did actually tell my worship team that, guys, I think I might be pregnant, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
And they were all like, oh my God. It's unbeknown to me, because I'm in such a visual ministry, I didn't realize that so many people were feeling sorry for me, even though I hadn't shared that we were doing IVF or trying. There's an assumption that once you get married, of course you want children. If you haven't got children, wow, what's going on? Oh, sorry about that. Oh, you know, it's very much. Anyways, they were ecstatic. I said, guys, you cannot tell anyone. I'm just sharing this with you so that you understand why my praise sounds like the way it sounds tonight. But I'm just you cannot tell anyone. The next day, I went back to, you know, I went to the chemist again, and I bought a Clear Blue, and it said pregnant. And I was like, really?
What's going on here?
I just thought, no, this is some kind of sick joke. I wasn't sure. So that was the beginning of my motherhood off the infertility journey.
And that was your eldest then that you were pregnant with?
That was Micah,
and you know what's amazing? It's so funny that we do this, talking about our faith and things. You just told us how you said, I need to be pregnant before my 36th birthday. You went to the order, said, I need to leave here healed and whole.
Yeah.
And then you get a positive pregnancy test and you're still like, what's going on?
Yeah.
It's amazing that we do that. Like, what? What's happening? It's like, but you just said that this is what you needed, and here it is. And you're like, but wait, no, this isn't right.
All I can do is, God doesn't need anyone's help.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking to myself, okay, well, this is nice. And I was still kind of not allowing myself to get too excited, because I just thought, they've already said that I need an egg donor, so I don't even know if this pregnancy is going to go to full term. There was all sorts of things that I didn't want to speak, though. I was thinking it, but I didn't want to speak it into existence and say anything that I shouldn't really say. I just thought, okay. At 10 weeks, I had a bleed. And this was my first pregnancy.
Yeah.
And I just thought, the moment that I had a bleed, I had to go to EPU, which is the early pregnancy unit. Yeah. Just for them to kind of do a scan and stuff. Thankfully, it was all fine. It was, fresh blood. It wasn't a lot. I didn't have any cramps. I didn't have any sort of symptoms of, at that moment, I realized I wanted this child.
Yeah.
Because it's only when something's taken away from you, or a choice is taken away from you, is
when it's threatened.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sitting in that consultant's office and her saying to me, you need to get an egg donor, at that moment I realized the choice of being a mother has now been taken away from me. Like being a biological mother has now been taken away from me. And it felt very different from the first 5 years where I wasn't even trying to get pregnant.
Yeah.
And then, so I mean, I was exclusively breastfeeding. And there is this whole kind of thing about, if you're exclusively breastfeeding, you can't get pregnant, blah, 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 blah. Not if you start to ovulate again, ladies.
Yeah.
And I was getting periods, but I didn't think they were periods. I didn't know I was ovulating. So
that's the thing. When it comes to breastfeeding contraception, it's so funny. Just a little anecdote about that. When I was a couple of years ago, I did a podcast episode as a guest, and it was talking about just pregnancy and postpartum and all that kind of stuff. And somebody, the guest on there, the host on there, was just saying about different types of contraception. I was like, well, breastfeeding can be, but there's some very specific things that make breastfeeding contraception. And we went through it all. And then about 2 months later, the host then messaged me, was like, I'm pregnant and I was breastfeeding, and you told me that is not. I'm actually now very good friends with that host, and we had our daughters, our second children, are very close in age. Nice. But it was just hilarious because yes, breastfeeding can be a form of contraception, but
not for everybody.
Not for everyone.
Yeah. So in December 2019, I had my daughter. At that time, Micah was 13 months old. Okay. So I had 2 children under 2. And then I decided to go on the POP, which is the progesterone,
the mini pill. People might know.
The mini pill. Because I'd had migraines before in the past and stuff like that, so I couldn't get the combined one. So I had the mini pill, but again, it was making my skin go spotty. I felt like I was getting a bit moody. I don't know. It just didn't. It wasn't the one. So I just thought, you know what? I don't really want to be doing this. And we just thought, let's just use natural contraceptives. I won't kind of go into what that is, guys. I think we all know what that is. So that didn't work either. So in 2021, I had my 3rd baby. All of them were naturally conceived, despite the definite, I would say, testimony of the clinicians. And they weren't wrong in terms of what they said when they just looked at facts. But facts are not necessarily truth. I don't think those two things are the same. I remember emailing the clinic when I first had Micah, saying, actually, you told me that I couldn't get pregnant and that I would. I just felt like you guys told me this and you were wrong. And they were like, oh, you should send pictures in for our Hall of Fame. Pardon?
And that's the thing. It still shocks me so much that there are so many stories like this where people have been told by different doctors, different clinicians, things that are very black and white. Whereas actually, when you really work in the world of medicine and the human body, we know that there's a lot of research we're doing, there's a lot of things that aren't completely understood. That doctor would have had many cases before you where she has said that you're not able to do this, and it has come about. And to have the confidence to give such a kind of diagnosis and, definitive kind of thing, it's one thing to say that for our clinic, what we're looking at, we can't offer you anything else. And this is what we think, may be the outcome for you. It's like when people have cancer and they, someone tells them that, oh, they've got 2 weeks living, and then 2 years later, they're still living. We see that so often. Like, this is a general public that just see these stories. Imagine if you're an oncologist or you're a fertility expert who does this day in, day out. You'll see so many things that go out of the what we expect. And so to give such a definitive answer, prognosis is just very confident. I don't know.
I agree. Even even things like just the language used as well. I mean, if you've ever read any of my blogs, I don't tend to say things like this is that. I use phrases such as evidence suggests, or I say things like this is unlikely, or the probability of is, the risk is, as opposed to something is or it isn't. I just think medicine and life is just not black and white. I guess we are trained to look at scientific trends and stuff, but I just think there is something outside of the science that we just can't explain.
Exactly.
And I mean, there have been some fertility experts that I've seen online saying that AMH, which is the ovarian reserve, is very kind of, to say that somebody's infertile because of low AMH and nothing else isn't correct. So it's very much sort of, sometimes people have even said to me, look, it's a fluke. Clearly you were never infertile, but you weren't there when I was sitting on that chair being told that I'm infertile. You weren't there when I was having to inject myself. You weren't
and they
there.
were seeing the scans and you were injecting yourself, and you still came up with just one egg that was able to be fertilized and didn't make it. Like, these things didn't not happen.
That's right.
And that's the thing as well, isn't it? What I usually say to patients are, if we look at people like you that have this condition around your age with these kind of markers or risk or factors, whatever, the majority of those people will have this long to live, or the majority of those people will struggle to conceive. But you are your own person, and we haven't got any data on you individually and what will happen to you. And so this is what I predict will happen from the data that we have. But what actually will happen, we have to wait and see, and we support you through it. That is literally the conversation that I have. I've had that since I was I remember being a junior doctor in hospital and just having just seeing so many things online of people saying about their prognosis. And I remember, especially when I worked in the elderly ward, I had to have a lot of these prognosis conversations. And I just decided to change the way in the language that I use, because there is so much we are learning now, evidence-based things that have been biblical principles. If you've got a faith, those kind of things we're seeing pan out now. And so a lot of things that we say and things that we speak really do have an impact on what happens. And the way in which our mind works as well is that if you were told something like there's no hope, not having that hope there of change, it really makes it difficult. It can change the way in which your brain functions. It can change the hormone levels, having those things. There's so much that we don't understand about the body that we need to be a bit more cautious with how we speak. But honestly, Rachel, I'm so grateful for you sharing your story with us. I know that there's countless people that will listen to this and will be inspired, and will, it will increase their faith as well. Not everyone's journey will be the same as yours, but it's the things that I really want to take away from this is that it sounds like what really changed for you was when you started to acknowledge the environment that your body was in, the high stress. You stripped things away. Yes, you lent on God. You did. You had your faith. You said, by the time I'm 36 and God heal me, and you did lean on your faith, which is so essential, but you also did work as well. You cut back your schedule, you prioritize sleep, you prioritize the way in which you're eating as well, and all those things, and you educated yourself too. And so we can see another example here. People talk about how stress can cause infertility, and it's not linear like that at all. But the effects that stress has on our body can then have ultimate effects on fertility. And so like you're saying about the ovarian reserve, whether some of the stress that you were under and the way in which it had changed, whether there was a degree of adrenal insufficiency or adrenal fatigue, and that was affecting things, and that you were just overscheduled, had such a massive impact on it as well. It's really just highlighting that we do have to be accountable to the level of stress we're putting our bodies under. And if we want certain outcomes to happen or certain outcomes not to happen, like negative things, then we do sometimes have to make those changes. And so thank you so much for sharing your story. Honestly, it was inspirational. And guys, I'm gonna get you now, Rachel, just to share with everyone where we can follow you online. And guys, follow her on Instagram, see her beautiful, beautiful children. I know your youngest turned 2, was it recently?
Yeah, gosh, she's growing up so much.
And they're honestly, they are gorgeous, and you have a beautiful family there. And I think I'd love to get you back on the podcast again to talk about some of the other aspects of, you know, how you actually dealt with that, dealing with so many children under that certain age, and just navigating all the things that you do. But thank you for today's episode. And so can you just share with the listeners where we can find you?
Sure. So on Instagram, I am really easy tag to remember. I am Rachel Francis is my Instagram tag. I'm also on Instagram for my health page as well, for those interested in sort of pharmacy related stuff. And that's I am Rachel Francis Health. I'm also on TikTok as I am Rachel Francis, and on Facebook as Rachel Francis Nweke, which is my full surname. So it's a mixture of mum life stuff, navigating work, and just sort of unpacking my thoughts really in my perfectly imperfect world, navigating motherhood and life, I guess. So yeah, please make sure you come and say hi, send me a DM. My DMs are always open. And I do have a lot of women sending me DMs just around fertility advice and things like that, and I'm more than happy to to listen, because sometimes you just want someone to listen. So,
yeah, exactly. Brilliant, thank you. And so guys, we'll be back next week again with another episode. Remember, if you're not subscribed already, please subscribe to the podcast, rate us and review us so that more people can hear these amazing stories. You can find us on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts under De-Stress with Dr. Amanda. And if you want to see our beautiful faces, we are also on YouTube at Life with Dr. Amanda. Until next time, thank you.